Welcome, sports fans, to GenX Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together. We're here to discuss iconic sports moments, teams, and athletes from our generation. This is GenX Classic Sports, sports talk for Gen Xers by Gen Xers.
Hello, everybody. This is Shon. Welcome back to the podcast, and we're about to pick back up with our discussion about the dual state tournament and our Gen X participants from that tournament back in that era. And so we'll pick back up right here with me and my guest, Wayne Pumphrey, talking about the dual state tournament. As always, thank you for joining us. Yeah, I think familiarity is great for these rivalry type things. You know, we saw it in baseball too,
Yes.
for that many different, there were so many fans that were just basketball junkies. They'd watch 4 or 5 games in a row after their kids played or whatever, because it was a different time as far as, well, and another thing was there wasn't a whole lot for them to do between games but sit in the gym and watch more basketball. Let's be honest. Yeah.
And most of them wanted to, Sean, I've had a lot of people over the years, and now that we started really collecting the information, I already had a fair amount, but now I'm really digging and hunting. And if you allow me to, on your podcast here, anyone interested in let me look at a scrapbook, or if you played in dual state, you don't have to be from Junction. Because as I mentioned before, we interviewed Coach Malcolm George this past Sunday. He made a statement. Dual state wasn't about Junction City. It was about every team playing in it, because that's what made the tournament. It is, yeah. It was. We hosted it. It's a Junction City tournament, if you want to say that, but it was not about us. Think about it. We're sitting here talking, and we have not mentioned Junction City players. So let me throw a name out there real quick. Another great one. Yeah, we're missing an NBA player and a guy I think still hooping overseas, and that's James Anderson. Yeah, a great, great,
One of
great
our own
player.
for sure. And
And
by the way, we're probably missing tons of other guys that did play that played
oh
D1 and
Lord, yes.
smaller college basketball that they're just not on our radar today. But as you're digging around in all your stuff, I know you know more names than we're talking about.
There was, uh, and the sad thing is, I just saw this the other day. There was a couple of, I believe, All Americans in the '50s on the boys' side to play. Okay, you have all this, all this history we're talking about, but in a certain era that we're talking about here with Carl and Benny. Now
Yeah,
add
for
all that
sure.
into it, and you see why people. What I was going to say a while ago. People would take a week's vacation and head to Junction City. Basketball junkies. Yeah, yeah, I'm coming. Some of them did not hardly watch basketball. Go to games. They may go to a couple games, but when dual state rolled around, I'm not concerned if I miss something. I'm going to see all these teams here. I'm going to see the Huddock girls. I'm going to see the Union girls. I'm going to see the McNeil boys and girls. Emerson, they'll be there. Taylor, Bradley, all these teams are coming in there, and Louisville. I just they keep. More I talk, the more I think about teams. And then on the Louisiana side, you had Simsboro that would come up and play. Arcadia, Sarepta, Cotton Valley. Yes, I mean they rolled in, and you would see them. Now some of them didn't come every year, but you had your stalwarts that showed up every year. Summerfield, Bernice, Dubach was good about it. Spearsville definitely, Marion. Now the sad thing is, and I got a whole episode I'm already working on that when we do the dual state, I'm going to do this. A
Yeah,
lot of those schools are
that's
gone,
kind of that's the burr in the
and
saddle
that's
there,
sad.
because what I was trying to
Yeah.
find my opening to bring that up, which is that the sad part about this is that most of what we've mentioned, they're gone. Most of those schools are gone on both sides of the state line. Arkansas hit a big consolidation effort. I don't even know how many.
Yep.
Early
Early
2000.
2000s.
Louisiana since then has the parish that we grew up in on the Louisiana side is down to really one high school. And Farmerville, Louisiana is hosting one big, massive parish high school, and all those other schools Wayne has pretty much mentioned out of North Louisiana have rolled into that school. So, Wayne and I, we like to think of ourselves as historians, even if it's through the lens of sports. It's important because of the hometowns and things and the small towns. And yeah, all of these places or all of these schools, not all of them, but most of them are gone. And if they were one of these small schools we mentioned, they're gone. They rolled up into something else. So, if you preserve the history of something like the dual state tournament, in a way, you're preserving the history of that school and that town, which is why it's important. And it just happens that people like talking about basketball and sports, but that's why it's important to me and to Wayne to talk about these things and keep a record of them in some way. I Googled before you and I got on here, I Googled dual state tournament Junction City, and there's not a word out there other than since the social media, since Facebook, when Junction City was still hosting it in the 2000s, there might be a notice on there that DSN is going to show the last round of but that was it. There was no history no articles are popping up. There's a dual state tournament in Kansas or somewhere. I don't know, somewhere else in the country. There's one named to that. Guarantee it didn't run as long as the one we're talking about. But there's nothing out there. I bet you, and I didn't do it, but I bet if you Google King Cotton now, you'd have a whole lot of information about it. And for
Oh
those who
yeah,
don't know, I don't even know if it's still running. Is it still running?
I think they're trying to bring it back.
Not too many years ago, briefly, but I think it went away again. I don't know.
I think it's when I haven't heard nothing on it, so I believe you're right. It's gone. I know it came back, but Sean, let me say this about this tournament, and you kind of you got me on a roll here. Dual state started in 1932. Over in Germany, a guy named Adolf Hitler was trying to take power, take over. The United States was in a Great Depression. A guy named Franklin Roosevelt was running for president. Dual state saw World War, the Korea War, Vietnam, and numerous other affairs. It went from a man on the moon joke to a man actually landing
Yeah.
on the moon. It went from you roll your phone like, of course you can't see me doing it, but you hold it up to your ear and you speak into it, to a dial tone, to now you can tote around. Now I'm talking to you on one. Numerous presidents, numerous world events, massive social change. It survived all that. And I'm trying to put together a numbers section. How many players play? It ain't gonna be exact number. How many people possibly attended? And I've been looking at stuff, and I think about that gym for 62 years, and it's a crying shame we did away with all that. I'm not going to get into that, but I am going to do an episode on what affected dual state, and I'll do it then. I'll definitely have you involved on that one. But for people to understand what you and I witness is something special that sadly, very, very sadly,
No.
we'll never
No.
see again. And
Yeah.
talk about Americana, one of my wife's favorite words. Go into that gym, like you said. I got to see Karl Malone, and you could walk. If you wanted to, you could have
Mm-hmm.
walked to it.
Yeah.
Right here in town. And what I miss, even all the way up to the end when we were even doing it at the Dragon Arena, was cars parked on the sides. You come through Junction, you're like, why is all these
Yeah.
cars parked on the side of the street? And they're all
Yeah.
in that gym, watching one of the greatest tournaments, high school tournaments that ever took place. I'll say that and stand by it.
I think that's safe to say. Yeah, and I'm not trying to I'm not trying to I'm trying to find the word here. I'm not trying to ignore thousands of other players and maybe dozens and dozens of other college and
Yeah.
maybe even a pro or two we don't know about players. I picked these three guys especially because they overlapped for one thing, and you really had Karl Malone affected basketball at every level he played in. He dominated in high school, he dominated in college, and he dominated in the pros. That makes him a little bit of a unicorn. You know what I mean? Benny Anders dominated in high
Yep.
school, and then he had a significant impact on a really good team in college. And then Bobby Joe
Yep.
Douglas still might be one of the top two or maybe these are the top three players that ever played in Louisiana. I don't know. I'm not educated enough to know that, but I know that Bobby Joe Douglas is in that conversation. And like I said, the legend of Bobby Joe Douglas is appropriate because he did things that these other two guys couldn't do. And everybody that was around knew that too. So I picked these three because they're Gen Xers really, and because they had such an impact on the history of that game, of the game going forwards at all of those levels, high school, college, and pro. And then you even have Karl Malone making an impact on the Olympic basketball level as being a charter member of the Dream Team when they decided. He was one of the last ones cut in 1984 from Bobby Knight's team and didn't make it. And I know from over the years he really hated that. And then he got his chance when they didn't take care of business in '88, and they pulled the pros in '92. Karl Malone got in on that one, and suddenly he's playing with Barkley and Magic and Jordan and Bird and all those guys. So he made his impact at the biggest level imaginable. And then if you go down to the college level, Anders made an impact along with Karl in a way. And then you go down to the high school level, and Douglas might have made an impact in high school more than those two guys. So I think they all are legends in their own ways, and they're definitely a part of Gen X. And it's just fascinating that they kind of overlapped, and that here we are talking about Anders and Malone in the finals of Dual State. And I believe you've already said, but Malone beat him in the finals in '81.
In the finals, Carl
Yeah,
Carl
yeah.
Summerfield won. Yes.
Did you know that they played in the NCAA tournament against each other?
I didn't know if it was something. As old as I'm getting, I don't know if it was something I dreamed up or what. I kept thinking, I said, they
It's
faced each other, I
amazing what
believe,
you
in
run
college.
into when you dig into some of this stuff, and something will catch your eye, and you get to
Yeah.
thinking, well, wait a minute, and you get to flipping around. So I pulled up their appearances in the NCAA tournament, and I got to noticing that, and this is significant. This will tell you how dominant Karl Malone was in college. He got Louisiana Tech to the Sweet 16 in 1984,
Yes.
85, and they got put out by University of Oklahoma, and they had a guy named Wayman Tisdale that was pretty good as well. And Karl, carried
Yep.
that team on his shoulders and got them as farther than they had never ever gone before. They were 29-3 that year. But going back to Karl, and that was after his junior year, when he did all of that. So he left after his junior year. Karl's sophomore year, Louisiana Tech also had a pretty good team, and they made the NCAA tournament, coming out of the Southland Conference. Back then, you had to win that conference. You were not going to get an enlarged bid coming out of that conference. Right. So
Oh no, you could be 26-4, and there wasn't no guarantee you getting in the NCAA.
did that back to back years. But in his sophomore season, they played Fresno State in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And then they played Houston in the second round of the NCAA tournament in '84. That was after his sophomore year, or his sophomore year. And he had 18 points and 8 rebounds in that matchup against Anders. Anders had 2 points in 8 minutes. Now, I will say I don't know the circumstances, but I will say two things about Anders. Between injuries and being in trouble with his coaches, you can easily explain why he might have had such low minutes in any game in the NCAA tournament, because I have records of other games where he played, 12, 15 minutes in the game. He was significant off the bench for them, in other words. But in '84, so 3 years after these guys squared off in Junction City in the dual state tournament, right? '81. 3 years later, they're playing on the big
Yep.
stage in the NCAA tournament against each other, and Benny Anders and Houston did beat Tech and put them out of the tournament. Karl having a much better individual game, but you talk about interesting that and I don't know, they could have played in some other arena too, but they played in the NCAA tournament for sure. So I thought that was really cool to note that they did square off against each other again.
Yeah, and think about that. Like you said, they played in the gym over here 3 years later. You could have watched them because CBS at that point. Yeah, I think they bought it completely from NBC, or outbidded NBC completely, I believe. And they were trying to show every game because it was becoming the March Madness and all that was starting to take place. If you had asked me, hey Wayne, I'm going to do a segment on Dual State, Give me three players. I would have gave you those three. If you now, take out the Gen X for a moment. If you'd have said, Wayne, give me three players,
Yeah, and then
I'd have named them.
James Anderson's right there behind them due to what he ended up accomplishing.
Yeah,
But and there's others, but Mount Rushmore for dual state men right there.
I like that. Well said. If you go, I put it this way: what tickles me, or it really gets me tickled, is when people start talking about, what happened to the dual state tournament, and I wish they still had it. I mean, I had a former administrator at Junction City corner me up in the pharmacy here in town one day, and he was adamant we got to bring it back. And again, it's about the third time I said this to you. Another story for another time. But if people get to talking about it, you say, well, who's the one player you remember the most? The vast majority are going to say Bobby Joe Douglas. But right behind him is these other two. And here's the kicker, like you said, they all come from that
Yeah,
same time frame.
they overlap.
All three of them. And I think what makes it like that is because they faced each other during the regular season and in the postseason, by the way, and they're all close by,
They're
and they
all a
all hit at the
30-minute car
same
ride
time.
away from each other. Maximum 30-minute car ride from each
Yes.
other.
And those four tournaments, 79, 80, 81, and let's throw 82 in there. You always had the crowd started out fairly good on Monday night or Monday night, Tuesday night. It gets a little bit better. Wednesday picks up. Thursday, it's on. When those
Yeah,
three played, it was almost from the start. You had big crowds because the crowd, I was telling you, asked me how much that gym could hold. It was a Wednesday night that figure was born. That was the night Marion played Junction City and Bobby Joe scored 64 points. The crowds, when they played, were solid afternoon and evening sessions because people were wanting to see the other team and at the same time get there early enough to get that seat to see Karl Malone.
can you rattle off for me who won those years? Do you know 79 through 81 or two who the winners actually were?
79 was Spearsville. J.J. Jackson, again, mentioned him earlier, a prominent player. Coach George mentioned him. I believe it was triple overtime over Stamps. 80 was Karl Malone. They faced Summerfield faced Marion in the finals. And Sean, I have to tell this: that finals, that final that night, with about 2.5 minutes to go, Carl and Summerfield been dominating, and they led by I believe around 13 points. So you
Oh
felt okay,
wow.
they got the game wrapped up. Bobby Joe got hot. And folks, we hadn't mentioned this before. I kind of avoided doing it because I know you're going to do a whole thing on him. The reason we keep mentioning him, he led the nation and scored in 1980. He averaged
Yeah.
54 points a game. No three pointers back then.
Yep.
No three pointers. I mean, his range was when he crossed half court. This is the way I was told by a former coach. I asked, well, I said, what was Douglas's range? He said, when he got to half court, you picked him up. If you didn't, he'd nail it.
Not a 7-footer that played with his back to
He,
the basket and they fed it him and he wheeled around and
no,
dunked it. This
no.
was a shooter. This was a shooter.
Coach George told me him and Karl Malone have visited over the years. Coach George told me that Karl Malone said the best shooting guard he ever saw, played with, or against.
Yeah.
Now think about this, folks. Karl Malone, one of the
Yeah.
50 greatest players in NBA history. Who all he played with. Sean, you said he wrapped up in '04. If I'm
That's
correct, he was with
correct.
the Lakers at that point. So you know
Kobe.
who he was playing with then. The best shooting guard he ever saw, played with, or against was Bobby Joe Douglas. In '80, they were down 13. They lost by 1 point. He got hot. He hit a couple of deep shots. Summerfield turned the ball over. That gym, I always say it like this: 10,000 people were going crazy. And you go, wait, whoa. You just said maxed out 2,800. Sean, you know that the wooden benches,
Yep.
people were stomping their feet. It was packed. The last shot of the game, I was sitting if you go walk into the gym and you go straight across the floor to the other side, I was in the far right corner.
Yeah.
Bobby Joe came down on that side, took a shot from the corner, his favorite shot. Karl was trying to block it. It rimmed out. I mean, we thought he had it because everybody was going, and the final score was either 79-78 or 78-77. At high school and high school. The next
Yep.
year, Summerfield repeated, and I believe they repeated the third year. A very good Junction City team made the Final Four, which was Holyfield, Hammett,
Billy
Joe Paul
Hoof.
Hammett, Vince Holyfield, Dennis
Billy
Warren,
Hoof. Yeah.
all of them, and they finished fourth in the tournament, which is nothing to be ashamed of because you just heard who we mentioned. Now again, think about this: these guys we just mentioned from Junction, two of them played in College World
Yeah.
Series,
Yeah.
in baseball
That's true.
at
That's true.
SAU, Southern Arkansas University. Very, very good players. You could make the argument Holyfield's probably one of the best athletes we ever had, period.
Definitely.
And there's another side story. And they're playing in dual state, and this is who all you got in it.
Yeah, and so 3 years in a row, or over only 2 years on 2 years, 80 and 81, you've got Bobby Joe, Karl, and Anders all in the finals between those 2 seasons. So
Right.
yeah,
Between those three, at least two of them were in the finals, if not, or in the final four. Let's say it like that, if not all three.
yeah, and I'm not trying to not talk about Bobby Joe, but he's definitely his own topic as well as these other two. But yeah, a guy that averages 54 before the free 3-point line, he's worth talking about.
Oh yeah. Well, I can see why you'd have your own. He's one to me. He'd make a perfect 30 for 30 story.
So you're going to lead that discussion when we get to it. I'm going to wait until you're ready, and we're going to talk about him. But I threw these names out there though because I really believe somewhat involved basketball player from our age frame is going to know Benny Anders if you say Phi Slamma Jamma. They're not going to know who Bobby Joe was because of what
Yes.
he didn't do in college and in the pros. And that's no disrespect to him
Right.
whatsoever. Like I said, there's a case that he's the best basketball player ever played in Louisiana. Who knows? But I just picked those two because I know they have the name recognition over Bobby Joe. But Bobby Joe Douglas deserves his own discussion for sure, and he has nothing to be ashamed about his career for sure.
And Benny Anders and yeah, the term that's used there was baggage. I mean, we'll just put it out there. But consider this: Benny played in two
Yeah,
Final Fours. I mean, okay, they didn't win, granted. They reached the finals both times.
he played. They lost out to in the finals. They lost out to Georgetown one year, and we know who their main player was. Some guy named Ewing. He lost 1 year to the semis to Michael Jordan. I mean, last time I checked, he was an okay basketball player. And I
Yeah,
think he probably had a
yeah,
teammate named Worthy that was a decent basketball player. And then
yep,
they got beat in the finals by the Jim Valvano North Carolina State Wolfpack miracle play. There is nothing wrong with that resume
yeah.
for playing basketball. And his 4th year,
Oh,
I didn't know this. The reason there was no 4th year was not because of any career decisions. He was hurt. He didn't play his senior year due to a knee problem. And Anders actually
yeah,
played overseas a little bit after he finished up at Houston. He played and then disappeared.
and
And there's
then
a whole story
disappeared.
to that y'all have to watch ESPN to find that out. But you don't get in there. You don't get in there in high school and mix it up with Karl Malone, and then in college turn around and play against Clyde Drexler and Hakeem Olajuwon and these other guys every day and not be a quality and really be their savior off the bench. He won some games for them in some NCAA tournaments, just bringing the energy and the athleticism and whatnot that he brought into the game when he got in there. And he was the guy that if you needed a guy to make a play and come down and throw down a dunk and get the momentum swung, that's Benny Anders. He was that guy.
Well, they played Louisville, which in the '83 Final Four, which was in Albuquerque at the Pit, the infamous Pit. Uh,
Okay.
Remember, they were the ones that beat Duke. Louisville was known as the Doctors of Dunk, and they said that day that game ushered in the era of modern basketball. They were up and down. I mean, people were fascinated, and everyone was claiming that was the championship game. Might as well be, because you had Georgia and North Carolina State on the other side, and everybody's, okay, two teams that they're not going, you know, they don't even need to be here. Benny had a dunk in that game. You can go on YouTube and search Benny Andrews dunk, and it'll pull it right up, and that shows him. But you hit it on the nail head. The reason he come off the bench, or what I found out over the years, the reason they bring him off the bench, you're bringing in a dynamic player that can either finish the team off or
Yep.
get you back in the game. Benny
Well, you
was
want a guy
that
off the bench
type
to
of
bring
player.
energy, and that was him. In fact, my note says he had two
Yes,
dunks in that game against Louisville that were something else. I kept seeing the word thunderous. Every time they talk about Benny Anders dunking, they'd call it thunderous. Well, and
thunderous.
he was known as a big leaper. He could jump. He could fly. So,
Oh yeah.
that's the guy you want being your sixth man or whatever for sure.
And if he makes the steal, and again, folks, I know we start to give away more and more to 30 for 30, but if he makes the steal, you'll hear his teammates say this, it changes his life. And he was that close to stealing it and probably getting one of those thunderous dunks.
I mean, he definitely made an impact on that team. It's hard to argue with 3 Final Four appearances and so forth. We all know what Karl did. He had 36,900 and something points and 15,000 nearly rebounds. He is the third highest scoring person that ever played in the NBA and the seventh highest rebounder that ever played. And he made 2 Olympic. Did he play in 96? Yes, he played in 96 also. 2 gold medals. He's in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame twice. Karl Malone is once as a player and an individual, and once as a Dream Team player. The Dream Team collectively is in there as a team, which it should be, and then Karl's in there as an individual.
Yeah.
So, and Karl played 19 years in the NBA, and I heard this one time said about him, and I had to go look it up because I didn't believe it. He's the only person I've ever heard of that this was said about. Karl was known, he was skinny in high school, but when he was at Tech, he was big and bulky like a defensive end, very muscular. Karl's the only person I've ever heard them say that he lost weight every year that he played in the NBA. He was lighter than the year before. So he came into the Jazz big from Tech. And every year going forward after that, he lost a little bit more weight trying to prolong that career. It obviously worked. I mean, he came into the league at 270 something and
Yeah.
he left it at 250 something. And it obviously worked because he played 19 seasons. And one of the things that really gets me about today's NBA is all this talk about their playing time and their rest days. What do they call that? Their something about the way they rest them. That they these planned games
Yeah.
where they don't play at all. And Karl Malone would laugh at that
Yeah.
because Karl played in the generation where you got out there 82 times a year no matter what. And so he was as
I don't understand
yeah.
they got to rest now and everything.
Well,
You paid a lot of
yeah,
money
he
to
was in
go
that
play, go
Barkley,
play.
Jordan Bird, Magic, Isaiah Thomas, all those
Yeah.
guys' generation. They didn't believe in that. So Karl had as good a. By the way, he was a 74% free throw shooter. So he's not like one of these guys that was a liability late in the game. He won a ton of games because he could shoot free throws at the end of them. So he definitely made his mark on Benny. There's not a lot of numbers to talk about because he was a role player. In some years he scored 6 or 8 points, and some years he didn't. But it was the intangibles that he brought a lot of times, like we talked about with coming in and bringing that energy. And then Bobby Joe, we're going to depend on you to dig all that up, and we're going to hear about it at some point. But to me, Bobby Joe has his own story that's that's like you said, it deserves its own 30 for 30. Actually, I'm sure I don't even know all of it, but I know just if
Yeah.
you just stopped at the day he quit playing high school basketball, it deserves it because he was some kind of dominant player back in that era before 3 pointers. I told you yesterday he probably would have averaged
But
60 a game if he.
oh, God. Easy, easy. Yeah.
Anything else? I mean, we've been going for an hour and 15, and man, that's plenty good for me. Anything else about it that you want to throw out there? I mean, there's so much history. Throw it in there.
I'll throw this in. Uh, Real quick on Bobby Joe, he did
Yes.
play college, went to NLU, played in the
Yep.
Continental Basketball Association, or some people
Yep.
now want to call it the G League, but it's actually a totally different thing. Karl also played in, I know of off the top of my head, don't hold me to it, but I know he played in three Final Fours, three NBA Finals. Two of those against that guy you mentioned that apparently he was very good player,
Yep.
Michael Jordan. All of those, all that stuff I'm telling you about, you talk about, and we're talking about Benny, 43, 44 years ago, you could have went right over here to our gym, the gym here in Genesee, and watched all three play. And I think that's remarkable, and I think that alone says a lot about the dual state tournament. Yeah, about $1 to get in, a couple more dollars you could have got hot dogs.
You know who we need to do a podcast with is anybody that ever had to work in the concession stand of Dual State Tournament. Those are the real heroes, man. My wife was one of them when she was on yearbook staff, and she has some stories. My little tidbit on history of that is when I was a junior, was the third year in a row Junction was going for the title. And Dale Hucks said, "Look, these girls back here, the girls and guys from the yearbook that are making these snacks for people." This was back in the days when you had wax paper cups and you poured the drinks over ice.
Yep.
And Dale Hooks told me, and different people on different nights, but I know Mac Knight was one of them one night, and he said, "Y'all have got to get this shopping cart, and y'all go around the outside of the gym on that paved sidewalk, and go around to the back. There were 2 or 3 of those ice machines that convenience stores use." So the ice is already delivered and pre-bagged and delivered and thrown in there in those 8-pound bags or whatever they are, and they're just brimming full. And he said, "We need guys to courier the ice back and forth." And they had a shopping cart. And I know I think it was Mac Knight helping. I was helping or something. But he said, in between, just go sit down and enjoy the game. Well, we made a run to start the game and got them good with ice, and we hadn't sat down good. And one of those girls, it got to where they just looked across the gym and wiggled their finger like this. "Come here." And we get up and go over and they say, "We need more ice." And so I never sat down for the evening session. I had to watch Junction win it, standing in what you called the foyer earlier, as best I could,
Yep.
and see Junction, because I was constantly going and getting ice, and we emptied all those ice machines. And you'd have thought, man, we're ready to go with it. No, I never saw anything from the bleachers, and they
No.
never quit pouring Coke. So I don't know how they didn't run out of cups, honestly.
I don't either. You're better off if you couldn't move around, because if people couldn't get down there, if there was just enough room to get down there, you wasn't going to
Yeah,
have
those.
much of anything left in there.
Yep.
Sean, one more thing. You talk about winning that three in a row. If you look at that 79 to 82, that's special. Add in the rest of the 80s into the 90s, and the
Mm-hmm.
dual state tournament was rolling.
Yeah.
Still very competitive, tough as it could be. Let me put another name in there that deserves mention, because he won a total of four, I believe. I know three in a row. I'll double
Yeah,
check on
Coach
that. But
Sweet.
Johnny
Coach
Sweet
Sweet,
was
yeah.
one heck of a coach, and he don't get mentioned near enough. Yeah, he was the coach of the three in a row. And I mean, think about that. That is something I believe. Let's see, you said your freshman, so
Yeah.
85, 86, 87. I believe he
I think
also won it in 83. And
yeah,
I
80,
believe he got four in a row.
yeah,
I
and
mean,
80, because
four
80,
total. I'm
by
sorry.
89, he wasn't coaching basketball.
Terry Crumpler had it for a couple of years, then Gary Wayne.
Yeah, Coach Sweet, I think you won 4. I know that other one was earlier. Now, I don't know if it was 82, 83, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
We
I want to
we
say
know who to
83.
ask, but yeah,
I'm
Junction
almost
had really
certain.
good teams then.
Yeah. Yeah, John, and keep in mind what we mentioned on the factor that around here is like we want to win dual state, and they may go to state and play, whatever they got to win dual state, and I always found that fascinating that we worried more about that tournament than getting into the state tournament and trying to win it.
That's how important it was. My brother, they won it in
Yes,
92, 3, somewhere in there.
94 was the year I think Tony Lockhart Norflet
Yeah,
surprised them.
they got beat on Saturday afternoon by Norflet, but the year before they won
Yeah,
it, and I don't know how many Wayman ended up with. I know of one, but I don't know if they won. Yeah, so
one.
well, it's a great tournament. It was a great tournament, and it has a lot to do with small town life and Americana, like you said, and that's what made it special. So there will be for the folks that the ones of people that listen, I will have more information later on whenever Wayne puts a project out, and there'll be various formats of those. I'm sure there's a lot of work involved in that. I'll make sure that the people who are on here will hear, and we'll pull him back in for other stuff like normal, and I'll help him out with a few things where I can. But I'm going to hit the stop record button, but hang on just a second, okay? All right, thank you, Wayne. I
All
appreciate your
right.
time, brother.
Thank you for joining us on Gen X Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.